So we had an interesting teaching group meeting. So all the teachers who teach accounting, we have to meet together a couple times a semester, and um, once at the beginning, and then once after we get our mid-semester feedback from the students. But almost all of the instructors in the teaching group had mentioned that they feel like they struggle to add a spiritual element to an accounting class, which I get it. It's a pretty um, I don't know what you'd call it, a pretty worldly course of study. In a lot of ways, we're dealing with money, uh, which we know is the root of all evil, according to the scriptures. It's actually, that's a lie. Everybody always quotes that wrong. It's actually the love of money is the root of all evil, not money is. But that's, it gets misquoted all the time. Anyway, and so we were looking at student surveys as far as what students felt like a class needed to bring them closer to the Savior, and things like that you would think like having a spiritual thought or having a spiritual message ranked actually like down in the middle. They weren't like absolutely worthless, but they also weren't what people were looking for. And things like instructors being real or being like seeming like decent people who knew about them and cared about their problems, that actually was higher for them. And I thought that was an interesting takeaway. So I do try to put our little spiritual discussions in every other week. There's a new one. I hope that you've seen those. Those are just things I've learned about, I guess, about the gospel through accounting. But also, I do want you to know that I am like a legitimately real person, and I, if you have a real challenge or an issue, or if you have something awesome, I love to hear about it. So I don't want you ever to feel like, I don't know, you're submitting your work to a nameless computer on the other end. Um, uh, anyway, so and then one other thing, about this stage, so I teach accounting at a secular institution, at Eastern Arizona College, which is just a state-funded college in Arizona. I also teach for Arizona State, which is, I would say, very secular, even more so than Eastern. But what's interesting is about this time when we're learning about trial balances and balance sheets, I'll observe students when they make things balance, they get like this little like moment where they like exhale, like, ah. And I'm like, that feels good, doesn't it? Like you feel something when everything's in balance. um and a lot of them say, yeah, it just feels right when the balance balances out and everything is the way it's supposed to be. And I have a really hard time not testifying to them right then and saying that's the spirit, because God's kingdom is a kingdom of order. And when things are orderly, they feel right to us. They feel at peace and they feel at rest. And there's a little bit of something there when you get something just right. I think it's why all those satisfying videos are so satisfying too. Like like there's this eternal nature that is uh, orderly, and when things match up with that for a moment, we feel just that moment of peace. And I try to tell them you can have that peace a lot more often. It doesn't just have to be at accounting, which I know is the holiest thing you'll do this week. But all right. So as far as general announcements, I don't really have anything new. I've noticed people are starting to submit their first drafts of their papers. Um, Again, I told you at the beginning of the semester that the paper is not like, I wouldn't spend hours and hours and hours on it. It's a short paper. As long as it's meaningfully written, meaning you put some real effort into it, the feedback is probably going to be, this looks good, go through the peer review process, which we'll do in another couple weeks, and submit it, and you'll get full points. Like that's in essence what my response will be. If there's some serious issues with it, like say it's been plagiarized, or the grammar is so far out of what's appropriate for a college level paper, then I'll provide that feedback too and try to provide some resources that might help you. I'll have feedback to you on your exams, hopefully today or tomorrow. It takes me a few days sometimes to, so just, I do 2 sections, so I've got about 100 students that I'm trying to review those exams and provide feedback on. And so sometimes it takes me a few days. Anyway, so that's kind of my general announcements. Any questions about general, I guess, non-accounting or, more like class-based stuff before we move into more curriculum-based things? Well, that's good. Everybody's great.
A quick question on the exam. When you do the feedback, does that mean that you'll give us the answers that we got wrong?
Yeah, so unfortunately, there's a departmental policy. Yes. Are you hearing me? Can you hear me? I don't know if you can hear me. Can you hear me, Cheryl?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I think there's a lag, sorry. Unfortunately, we're not allowed to show you like the answers of what you got wrong. But what I can do, and because I have 100 students and about 85 of them don't care, I will on a one-off basis, if somebody says, hey, I'd really like to know what I missed, I can kind of go through their exam and say, you missed these concepts. I can't show you the problem with the answer. I guess that's to protect the exam or something. And that's, like I said, that's not a me policy, that's a school-wide or, well, department-wide policy. So yes, if you want me to, let me write down your name. I will provide you some feedback on the problems you missed. Would you like that, Cheryl?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Yes, I don't know if you can hear me.
Well.
Yes, I have. I'm writing down your name. Who said they would like that as well? Everybody who's on here?
Yes.
I did.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that would be nice too.
Okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
so
Yes, please.
their policy, and it says it right in there on the test. It's like exams are for, I forget their terms, but it's like, and I get what they're saying. They're saying that this is meant to be a measurement of what you've learned, not a part of the learning process, but a measurement process. But that being said, most normal human beings are like, I gotta know, man. I gotta know what I messed up. And so I can do that. But like I said, what I found is if I try to go and do that for every student, that I'm doing a ton of work, and most people don't even look at it. So it's better if I know you want me to do that. I can do that, and I can even make a one-on-one time to talk to you if you want to talk about it and go over stuff. So I'll start by sending you a little email that says, here's the concepts you missed. And then in that email, I'll say, if you want to meet together via Zoom one-on-one and talk about it, we can set up a time. Okay. Will that work? All right. Sorry. Like I said, I think there's kind of a weird lag.
From my perspective, I don't know. Oh, okay. I won't talk then.
Oh, it's okay.
Well, if you can't hear me, it doesn't do any good. But from my perspective, I don't know if I've even learned the material if I don't know whether or not I got it right.
And I think you'll find that there'll be some things that you learned just fine and just made a mistake on because it's a tricky test, the way they write some of the questions. But there's other things where it's really valuable to go, oh, I think I really did not understand the way that was laid out. So, okay, so I'll do that. The advantages of coming to the meeting, see?
Thank you.
All right, so let me, any other questions?
Thoughts?
Yeah, yes.
I have another question. Will the material that we did in this first exam be covered in our final exam, the last exam we take?
Yes.
It will be, okay.
Yes.
Yeah, that's why I would want to have a feedback on mine so I can focus on what I actually missed out. Thank you.
Yeah, the final exam is truly cumulative. It has a little bit of everything, which is really nice of them to do, and everybody appreciates it. Anyway, so
You're being funny.
well, I guess that's what a final exam is. But there's a part of me that's like, hey, how about you just ask me about stuff we learned last chapter? That'd be great. Okay, so I'm gonna go over just a few concepts for this chapter. So I'm gonna share my screen. Maybe. Let's see. All right. So I think most of you have been exerting personal resources toward memorizing these concepts right here, a summary of the debit and credit rules. Um, um, so I'll tell you how I think of it, and maybe you can, whatever tricks you have, but I just remember this. I remember the balance sheet items all together: assets, liabilities, and equities. And I have to memorize that assets are increased with the debit and decreased with the credit. And then I just remember that liabilities and equity behave the opposite of assets. So I feel like for memorizing this one thing, assets, I'm getting all three. Does that make sense? And the reason it's logical in my brain that assets would behave the opposite of liabilities and equity is because assets are on one side of the balance sheet and liability and equity are on the other. And so they're opposites from each other. And then I just remember that revenues are decreased with the debit and increased with the credit, and expenses are the opposite because revenues and expenses they're opposite things, right? Revenue is the money we bring in from business. Expense is the money we pay out. So for me, if I memorize that one thing, I get all three of these, and then memorize revenues and get expenses. I have all of them for memorizing two concepts. That may work for your brain, or your brain might say that did not help me at all. So the bottom line is you really do just have to kind of memorize this. It's a foundational principle of accounting. It's funny because I teach students every semester whose parents are accountants, like CPAs, and they'll be like, why are they forcing you to learn this? Like, I don't ever think like that in accounting anymore. And I'm thinking like, well, you do, but it's kind of like when your fourth or third grade kid is learning times tables and you're like, why are they making you memorize those? You could just use a calculator. But you don't realize how often you use your times tables every day. When you're doing mental math and things. So they're foundational piece. Anyway, so that's a summary of the debit credit rules. This doesn't have it doesn't have dividends on here, but dividends behave like an expense, and so they're increased with a debit and decreased with a credit. I'm going to bring up my chat. These slides are available. I actually pulled them off of the. I'll show you where I pull them off of when I finish, if I don't forget. Wait, in fact, let me just do it now, or I will forget. I know me. So I forget everything. So here I am just in the module of the course. And if I, right here where it says textbook access, so right above the week 1 module, there's the Wiley Plus Read, Study, Practice. Load that in a new window. I wait half an hour. Okay, there it is. And then for each chapter, so like right now I'm on chapter 3, and then there's a PowerPoint review of the chapter, and that's where these slides come from. There's a whole bunch of them, but I just cut it down usually to 5 to 10 so that we're not taking hours to go through it. Anyway, so that's that. Let me get this back up. It always assumes I want it on the screen. I don't, so then I have to swap it. There we go. All right. So what I want to do is just take you through a few steps or a few examples of recording entries. So there's always this process, and I'll let you know that 25 years of doing this, and I still do it the same way. I just do it faster, but I still follow these steps when I'm doing this in real life for business all the time. So the first thing I do is I ask myself what accounts are involved, and then I ask, okay, do debits or credits increase or decrease these accounts? And then I translate that into the entry. Okay, I still follow that process every day. So for example, here's our first event. October 1st, the stockholders invest $10,000 cash into this company. So my first question is, well, what accounts are involved? And I would say cash and the common stock account. And then I ask myself, what type of accounts are those? Cash is an asset, and common stock is stockholders' equity. And then I'd say, what's happening with them? Well, cash is increasing and common stock is increasing. And then finally, I would translate that into the debit credit rules. I'd say, okay, an increasing asset, that's a debit. An increasing stockholders' equity, that's a credit. And then I would create my journal entry: cash, debits, common stock, credits. And then finally, I could post that to my ledgers: a debit on the cash, a credit on the common stock. So I think that if it were me learning it all over again, I would follow those steps, because in time it becomes natural. You just do it all the time. And so now I can just look at it and be like, oh, cash, common stock, because I do it. Actually, I don't credit the common stock account that much in my day-to-day life. Okay, like, just people aren't investing in the stock of a company all the time when you're doing small business type of taxes. But anyway, so here's another example. On October 1st, they borrow $5,000 by signing a 3-month, 12%, $5,000 note payable. So I would say, okay, I have cash increasing and a note payable increasing. Cash is an asset, so it increases with a debit. Note payable is a liability, so it increases with a credit. And then I could do my journal entry: debit the cash account, credit the notes payable account, and then I could post it to my ledger. If I'm going too fast, don't be afraid to jump in and ask a question. I'm just sort of throwing that out there. I'm trying to go through these examples. There's you can see several of them, but I think they're helpful. Okay, they use $5,000 cash to purchase equipment. Okay, cash and equipment, both asset accounts. My equipment account is going to increase, and my cash account is going to decrease, because that's what's happening when I use cash to buy equipment. So I have cash and equipment and asset increasing, so that's my debit, and cash and asset decreasing, that's my credit. So there's my journal entry: debit to equipment, credit to cash, and then post those to my ledger. All right. October 2nd, they received $1,200 cash advance from a client for guide services for a multi-day trip that are expected to be completed in the future. Oh, this is a tricky one. So now I have cash increasing, and I have a special type of liability account called unearned revenue that is also increasing. Unearned revenue just means money I have received but have not yet earned. Okay, this happens a lot in my own business. I own storage. People will pay for like a whole year's worth of storage, but I don't want to record that all as revenue the day I get the cash. Instead, I record it as a liability, meaning I owe the money back to the customer, or I owe them the use of my storage for the next 12 months. Then each month, I recognize a certain portion of it as revenue as I earn it. Anyway, so I have an asset increasing, that's my debit, and I have a liability increasing, that's my credit. October 3rd, they received $10,000 cash for guide services provided. So this is revenue they've already earned. So I have my cash increasing and my service revenue increasing. So I'll debit cash, which is an asset, and credit revenue, which is a revenue account. In the previous chapter, they tried to, I guess, explain revenues and expenses as far as their relation to stockholders' equity. But from now on, it really is helpful to just consider them their own type of account. So instead of thinking of assets, liabilities, and equity, and then within equity, thinking of common stock as an increaser, and revenue as an increaser, and expenses and dividends as decreasers, it's easier and actually makes more sense to think of revenue and expenses as their own type of accounts. And you'll see that as we go forward, that's kind of how it's done. So again, cash increases with a debit, and service revenue increases with a credit. And then we post it to our ledger. All right, they pay office rent of $900. So that means our cash is going to be going down, an asset decreasing, and our rent expense being recorded. This is sometimes confusing. Whenever we have an expense, we say it's increasing when we pay that expense. And so that's a little confusing at times. So we're going to say we have an expense account increasing $900, that's a debit, and a asset account cash decreasing, that's our credit. Post it to the ledger. All right, October 4th, they pay $600 for 1-year insurance policy. So this is a little bit different too. So when we prepay for something, that creates a special type of asset account, in this case called prepaid insurance. That represents, I guess, the use of insurance for the next year, okay? So we're going to debit our prepaid insurance account. This is an asset that's increasing, and credit cash, which is an asset that's decreasing. We purchase 3 months of supplies on account. So again, supplies is an asset. So that's increasing. That'll be a debit. And then because we're paying for it, whenever it says we purchased it on accounts, it means we're not paying in cash. Instead, we are borrowing the money. Usually it happens, the supplier says, hey, you have until next month to pay me, or something like that. So that creates a liability account called accounts payable. So the liability increases with a credit. Let's see, October 9th, they hire 4 employees to begin work on October 15th. Each employee will receive a $500 weekly salary, and the first payment will be October 26th. So the tricky part of this is if no money has changed hands, or even no promise of money, like the customer hasn't, I mean, the employee hasn't worked, so they haven't earned any money, then there's no accounting event that's happened yet. This is more of an informational thing that we've hired these people, but after they start working, then we'll owe them money. So on October 20th, they pay $500 cash dividend to stockholders. So our dividend will be going up and our cash will be decreasing. So dividends increase with a debit, and cash, which is an asset, decreases with a credit. And finally, we pay our employees $4,000 in cash. So our salary and wage expense will be increasing $4,000. That's a debit. And our cash will be decreasing $4,000. That's a credit. All right. So here's our journal entry. So if you think about it, a journal entry is just a chronological record of each financial transaction that occurs. So each day, as we do these, we just record them right here. If a company really had this many transactions in a month, they wouldn't even need special accounting software, right? They could just keep track of this in Excel or something. But think of a company like Walmart and the number of transactions they actually have in a day. They need software, right? So this is the rest of our journal entry. And then this is our ledger. So if the journal entry is chronological, then the ledger is grouping all of these activities by account so that we can then get a balance on the account. Again, we would expect all these asset accounts to have debit balances. That's the normal balance for an asset account. And we find the balance of the ledger simply by adding up both sides and then subtracting the smaller side from the larger side. So in this case, we had $26,200 if we add up that debit side. And we had, what, 5, 9, 99, 10,000, $11,000 on the credit side. So we just add all those up, subtract out the credit, and that's our balance. We never have negative numbers on ledgers, okay? We either have a debit balance or a credit balance. So if the debit side is larger than the credit side, we'll add up both sides. Whichever side is larger, that's the side the balance will go on. So we would describe this by saying cash has a debit balance of $15,200. Supplies has a debit balance of $2,500. Common stock has a credit balance of $10,000, etc. So this provides a summary of the balances of each account. And then once you have this, it's super easy to create a trial balance because you know all the balances and you know whether they're debits or they're credits. So your trial balance will just have your debits and your credits. And trial balances always follow the same order: assets, liabilities, stockholders' equity, dividends, revenues, expenses. They always follow that same order. And it should balance. If it doesn't balance, we got problems, right? What's nice is it's kind of a check, right? If something doesn't balance, you get to go back and say, okay, where did I make a mistake? So there's my summary of kind of this chapter. Does it bring up any questions? You were all very quiet, which means either you're very polite or that you have no questions or that I'm an incredible teacher. It's one of those things. I choose the last one. Cheryl.
Yes, you are an incredible teacher, and you answered my homework question. The biggest mental block I have is that, and this was decades ago, but I worked in a bank 40 years ago, and I cannot grasp this concept of debits and credits. To me, debit, you take away, credit, you add. And I mean, do you have a trick into overcoming that mental block?
I don't know if it's a trick, but it can help to understand why it's that way in banking. So remember that a bank is in essence a borrower of people's money, right? So if I deposit $10,000 into a checking account, from my perspective as the depositor, my cash account has gone up and it's an asset. So I would call that a debit to that account. But that's not how the bank sees it. So the bank is working from their perspective. So when they receive $10,000 from me, they have received a liability. Okay, so they're going to credit my account to record the $10,000 liability. The bank owes that $10,000 back to me at some future point. So that's why they use the term credit in banking when you increase an account, is because from their perspective, all accounts are liabilities. All customer accounts are liabilities for a bank. Anyway, I don't know that will help you. It helps me a little, but yeah, unfortunately, it was like you got taught how to ride, a bicycle that was like somehow backward, and now you have to, relearn it or something. You're not alone.
I was gonna say, I made a little spreadsheet for myself and did it to my little study group. And I just have to memorize it, but for me, if I just memorize 3 of the parts, then I can figure out everything else. And I'll email it to you, Cheryl, if you want. I don't know if it'll help, but just another way to look at it.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Sure.
Yeah, and I included my little cheat sheet or whatever you want to call it.
I like yours too. Does this let me screen share? I'll show it real quick if you want.
Yeah, I may have to.
Debit credit rules?
Give me a second, and then I can.
Okay.
This thing like automatically for some reason does not allow screen sharing, so I have to like each time manually tell it it's okay, and like each time I forget how. So let's see. Stop share more multiple participant advanced sharing all participants, like every time. There's probably a way I can set that as a.
I think that did it.
Okay, you should be able to now.
Can you see that, Cheryl?
Yes.
So what I did is on this debit side, I put a little star by those 3 things. And that's your normal balance for those 3 things. That's what the stars mean, is that your normal balance would be a debit. But if I just memorize right here where it says the easiest way to memorize this is to remember assets, expenses, and dividends behave the same way. They're going to increase your debits, decrease your credits, and the normal balance is the debit. I just have to memorize it. It doesn't logically make sense to me either. I'm in your math here of like credits and debits should be the other way around. I think I just have to memorize it. I don't think I can make it logical.
Yeah, I agree.
And then the pattern you'll see is the normal balance is always the side that increases the account, right? Like that's
right.
That's the other pattern that I feel silly saying it, but there's always people that are like, oh, well, that makes a lot more sense. So it doesn't always, like, I guess, just naturally make sense to everybody, or not make sense, but even they recognize that relationship that exists.
Well, even looking at debits and credits from the perspective of the bank makes a lot more sense after you said that. I like when I look at my account, I'm looking at debiting and credits, but I'm looking from my perspective, but it's actually the bank's perspective. So
right.
That was a good
Yeah,
point.
leave
actually.
it to the bankers, man. It's I have a friend who's a lawyer. I always tell him, like, lawyers are the only people that the scriptures say that, like, that the Savior hates, I think, or something. I don't know if it says hates, but I think he calls them vipers and things. Uh, um, so I always,
Well, both my parents were bankers, and they were good people. They didn't make up the rules.
well, I've decided that accountants are really just number lawyers anyway, so they're probably just as bad. We will strain at a gnat, and we do all of those things. So anyway, I can't claim any sort of righteousness because of my field. Maybe engineers, maybe they're the holy ones. I don't know. Maybe the people in retail, they're the ones working so hard. Retail and healthcare, I don't know. Anyway, so any I guess more specific questions about either problems, homework problems, or homework concepts?
Kind of like along the lines of what we were talking about, like with the homework part 1, exercise 3.1, there was 3 of them I couldn't understand, like what increases and what decreases.
Okay, well let me pull it up.
Okay.
Give me a second here. So it was the part 1, you said?
Yeah, part 1, exercise 3.1, and then it was numbers 4, 6, and 7. I couldn't understand. Like,
Okay.
for number 4, where it's
Oh, hold on.
built.
Wiley Plus is being dumb.
If
Sorry.
you want me to wait, I can.
Now, does anybody else ever get frustrated when Wiley Plus will like not let you open up a second window? And if it were a person, you might want to punch it in the nose or something.
Definitely.
Okay, exercise 3.1 or brief exercise 3.1? Sorry.
Exercise 3.1, where it's
All right.
9 problems.
9 for the price of 1. You're like,
Yeah.
oh, it's just, you first look at it, like, there's only 4 questions on this homework. This is going to be easy, like that. And then each question has subsection alpha. And so, okay. So, all right. So you said number 4?
Yeah, so number 4, I did 2 tries and I didn't understand, so I figured I'd come and ask, so I wouldn't lose my 3rd try.
I understand.
Yeah, I first thought number 4 was going to be like you decrease in assets because you didn't receive that yet, and then you would decrease your equity because it was your revenue, and revenue is part of equity.
Right. Okay.
And that was wrong.
So students who take this class face to face, they can pal up with other students, and then they get 6 tries, right? Like if they do their homework together. I tell them that's not cheating. I think that's learning. You can't do that on the exam, but you can do that on the homework. It's like ration your tries. Anyway, so when we bill customers for services that we've performed, what we're doing is we're recording a revenue. So once we perform the service, we record a revenue. And then whenever you record a revenue, you have to get paid for it one of 2 ways. Okay, either your cash has to increase, meaning you got paid in cash, or your accounts receivable has to increase, meaning you billed the customer and they're going to pay you at some future point. So in this case, what we'd be doing is we'd be debiting accounts receivable, which is an increase in our asset. You can see, look, I'm giving you the answers right here. Man, that's terrible of me. You're like, yeah. But let's understand why. So accounts receivable increases, that's an increase to assets. And then our revenue increases, what's going to increase our stockholders' equity.
Okay.
Sarah,
And then you said,
on those problems, I literally like write the like we just did earlier in the class, like tonight. I literally write down on my paper accounts receivable and make up a number for billed customers, let's say $200. Well, that falls under my assets. And then, you're recording the revenue because you did the service. So that falls under your stockholders' equity.
Okay.
You're actually
Like I literally
writing out a
write
journal
it.
entry.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's the only way I can like whittle it down. And then I use my little cheat sheet after that if I need to. But I have to literally put them into the accounts that they would be in and then look and say it went up or down.
Right. So you said number 7 as well?
Yeah, 6 and 7 were the other 2 I struggled with.
Okay, so 6, we incurred advertising expense on the account. So if we incur an expense but we haven't yet paid it, that creates a liability.
Okay.
And so so what we're going to have there is we're going to record our expense. So we'll do a debit to the expense account, advertising expense, and then we'll credit accounts payable because we're going to owe to pay that at some point. So advertising expense, so an increase to expenses decreases stockholders' equity, and then accounts payable is a liability. So that's going to be an increase to the liability account.
Okay, that makes sense.
And then received cash from customers billed in number 4. If we had an account receivable, when we actually receive the cash, our asset cash is going to go up. That'll be an increase to assets. And then our asset accounts receivable is going to go down. So that's going to be a decrease in assets.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. No,
for
I'm glad it
explaining
helped.
that. Yeah,
Kristen.
it did help.
Yeah, Kristen.
Yeah, I just had a question actually on the exercise 3.5. I have already turned this in because I wasn't as smart as Sarah, and I should have waited for my third response. But on that, so the first on A was fine. So I got all that right. And then when I went to the next B, where do I'm confused as to where that beginning retained earnings number starts.
Yeah, so this is a little tricky. The only reason you know is it tells you this is the company's first month of operations. So you only get retained earnings by earning them.
Yeah.
So a brand new company will start with 0. So it's kind of I think it's kind of a trick question.
Yeah, I totally was so lost.
It's kind of like Wiley beating you up and taking your lunch money.
Yeah, it totally did, and it made me cry. So
you're like, I can't deal with this right now. I understand.
Well, yeah, I had a lot of the things going on, but still. Okay, so because once I get that number, I'm golden. I can do
the net income's easy, and then the dividends is given to you, right? So
yes, so I get that part. And then there's another question I had, but I don't know if anyone else has a question on this one, because the other question I have, I think, is on part 2, where it has like all the whole table that you have to fill out of all the cash, of all the assets and all that. I had questions on that but I didn't know, does someone else have questions on this before we?
Any other questions on part 1, and then we can look at part 2? What's nice about Wiley Plus is even if I'm showing you the answers, the numbers are different on everybody's, right? So we're still learning the process. You'll still have to do it with your own numbers. Tricky Wiley Plus. Any other part 1? Let's take a look at part 2 then. Let's see. I better close out of this one. Sorry, you can't see it. There's like a little floating toolbar here for Zoom that like is in the way of everything when I'm trying to. So let's see. Chapter 3, part 2. All right, which one was it?
Let me look, because I'll have to go in and see and make sure I'm on the right thing. Give me just 1 second, sorry.
This is what you would have been doing while I was working out another one on part 1 for anybody who needed to. See?
Sorry.
So it's everybody else's fault for not asking a question.
Well, I do notice that it says that it's your fault that we only get 3 tries. So if you wanted to give us one more, that'd be okay.
Well, except that I'm not allowed. So it's an interesting thing teaching for BYU. So at ASU, like the way the course is designed is like you design it as the teacher. And then like this course designer guy will email you and be like, will you please let me look at your course? And you just have to say no. Like, I'm the professor here. But at BYU, it's like they design everything and it's like you will not vary, you will not alter. Everybody will have it the same way. So So like there's radically different philosophies, I guess. And so even if a student says, hey, I need a disability accommodation, I have to go through, I have to take what the disability office has provided, go through the division head before I'm allowed to say, yes, we can do that. It's very rigid. And that's not, there's a lot of good things about it, like a consistency, of course, from class to class. But at times, it'd be nice to just be like, I'm doing it. I'm a decision maker. Anyway, I try that at home, and my wife's just like, not really. Like, she's not
It
even
sounds like the same reason that we're blocked from going to church. We can't not hug and shake hands.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
All right, Kristen, did you find it?
Okay, so I didn't find it, but it doesn't really matter because really the main question I have is just when you have that whole table laid out and there's cash, it says that whole column of cash, right? Is that all of, like, I think I'm confused. What confuses me the most is like if I have something in that cash column, I mean,
Look at
there's something in every single.
Refi A has like a cash section at the bottom, and B. Is this one? Look at B. Is that what you're talking about?
No, I don't know which one it is now because I've already submitted my one. It might be part one. I don't know, but it's got like where you have to fill out every single box of the whole table. And it's got your cash, your supplies, your
It's like key
insurance.
accounts for every one of them, ledgers for each one of those.
I'm not sure. I think so. It
Yeah,
might be in part one, but I think what I'm confused on it, I mean, in the book, it has the table examples too in the readings. And it has like, it all laid out like this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and then all the rows and then the columns for each thing. And you're supposed to like balance it all out. But I think what's confusing me is on that very first column, on that cash column, should there be a number on every single thing because it's balancing from?
Without seeing it, I think the answer is no, unless they
I
want
mean,
a balance each time. But without looking at it, let's go back and
maybe it's part one, like the
yeah, I'm going to
last
stop sharing
one
my
or
screen for a
something.
second because I want to give you a good answer.
I can look again. Hold on. I should have written it down. I just had surgery yesterday, so my mind is kind of weird.
Okay, I think I found it.
Okay,
So let's
I'll come
see
back
if
to you.
this is the one you're talking about. Is it like this thing?
So that's like the table, but the one that they want you to do, maybe it is that one. It's just like B or C or something. No, that's not it.
Right here.
That's the one. That's it right
This
there.
ridiculous thing.
Oh my gosh, this thing
Okay.
drove me nuts because I still didn't get it right at the end. Like I was
Right.
like, whatever.
So yeah, so there's not always cash on every line because it's not asking you to do a balance on each line. So it's just asking you to like, instead of a journal entry, which would have a debit and a credit, here they're trying to, I guess, have you think conceptually like an increase or a decrease to each account without debits or credits. So like on the first one, you would say, okay, the stockholders invested cash. So I'm going to have an increase to cash and an increase to common stock.
Okay,
Second
so
one.
if I'm adding that increase to the one side in the assets, like let's just split that in half. If I'm adding something over there, then I have to do it the same to the other side, right? Essentially.
Most of the time. And I'll tell you
Okay.
what I mean. So here's our equal sign, right? Assets equal liabilities plus stockholders' equity. So typically speaking, we either have to, if we add on one side of the equal sign, we have to add on the other. Or if we subtract, then we subtract on the other. But occasionally we can add and subtract on the same side.
Okay.
So for example, here, someone paid us cash for accounts receivable. So our cash went up and our accounts receivable went down, and everything is still in balance because we added an asset and subtracted an asset.
Okay.
That had no
maybe
effect on liabilities or equity. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So maybe that's where I went wrong, is I just got confused as to what I was trying to equal out.
If you think about it, if
Hmm.
if an asset goes up, then the only thing that can really account for that is either a liability, we borrowed the money, or we
Okay.
borrowed to buy the truck or whatever, or a stockholder's equity, common stock goes up, the owners put money into the business to increase that cash or that truck or whatever asset, or we used one asset to pay for another asset. So like our cash went down and our truck went up, or our equipment went up or whatever.
Yeah.
And that's really like, after you do this for like every day for like 20 years, you start to be like, why was this ever hard? Because there's really only, there's a like a finite number of scenarios, probably 12 scenarios that account for like 90% of all journal entries, or 99%. But while you're learning it, it's still new, right? So it's seems crazy. Someone put out there that they thought it was as hard as learning Mandarin.
That was me.
That was, and I was like, that's not true. Uh, I speak Mandarin, and it's way harder than this. It's the tones, man, and the characters. The characters get you.
True.
Why didn't they not think of having an alphabet? I don't understand.
Well, I used to work at a school that was it was Chinese immersion. I just remember the first graders, like their teacher would talk to them in Mandarin. And I was the librarian, and so I would say to them, I'm like, what did your teacher just say? And they're like, we don't know.
Yeah.
I was like, oh my gosh, I can't imagine spending an entire day being taught to a language and you have no idea what your teacher's saying. But eventually they catch on.
So that's how I feel about the poor students who are taking this class, but for whom English is not a native language. It's got to be really hard. I wouldn't want to learn accounting in Chinese. It's hard enough to learn in English. Anyway. All right. Did that help, Kristen?
Yeah, thank you.
It didn't really, right? Because you already missed the points, but
Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
but I need to understand it if I
Yeah,
can.
I know. All right. Any other questions from the work, or are we about done?
I have a question on the proctor test.
Okay.
When we are starting the thing, are we supposed to like hold our paper up like this, make sure that I did it this time, but I just didn't know if that was what I was supposed to do.
Yeah. So let me tell you how Proctorio works. It's this computerized system, and if it notices that like you are like looking away from the screen a lot during the test, it will flag you. And then that flag, it doesn't mean you automatically fail or that you get accused of cheating. What it does is it sends an exception report to me, and it says this teacher or this student was actually, the first thing it does is it sends it to a person who works for Proctorio, who like actually looks at it and says, and then they send a little exception report to me that says this student was, appeared to be using notes, or this student appeared to be whatever. And so showing your blank sheet, I think, is a way of sort of like forestalling that. So then if you're looking at those, or if you're writing on your scratch paper, it almost never comes back to me, because I think the person reviewing it says, oh, well, they showed their scratch paper and clearly that's what they're using. Is it dumb in the sense that somebody could like have another piece of paper on the table with their notes on it and like cheat? Yeah, I guess it is. But I would say I think we should keep our mouth shut about that, because the only other option is using the whiteboard, and that thing's terrible. And so this is like an exception that the accounting department has allowed for people to use scratch paper. And I know like the first time somebody gets caught cheating doing that is when that'll blow up, and we'll have to use that crazy whiteboard. So that was a really long answer for your short question, which is, yeah, show it. And that seems to forestall me getting exception reports.
No, well, this is the thing, like I decided to go in my bedroom to take the test because there was just too much stuff going on around the house, and then I didn't want to have traffic, people walking behind me or whatever. But I was sitting on the floor taking the test, and then I realized that when I was sitting writing down, I'm like going, oh my gosh, is this going to flag me? Because I'm like looking down and writing, because I'm not really in a level spot. I'm sitting, and I didn't dare change locations because then I felt like that looked, I don't know. Anyways.
Yeah, we used to have to like do physical proctoring, like everybody had to get a form filled out, and that was a pain. they'll go to a Sylvan testing center and pay a fee, or go to a public library, or people in remote areas would like have their bishop proctor them, whatever. I felt bad for the bishops, like in all the things they've got to deal with, like proctoring is like a weird one. But you know, if that's it, that seems like anyway, an okay way to help out. But so then they switch to this, and like the number of people who say this gives them anxiety, they're just like worried about, like, is the computer thinking bad thoughts about me, or something. So I'm sorry, there's no perfect answer for it. I guess the perfect answer would be that nobody ever cheats, and so we never need to proctor anything. But unfortunately, even here at BYU Idaho, I have had students, one like was bringing up and Googling things right on their screen, and like I'm like, Proctorio is capturing your screen, man. And anyway, so don't do that. Don't Google for answers
No way around that one.
on your screen. Yeah.
Your screen was recorded.
Yeah, I was just like, come on, man. And so I tried to email him, like, hey, let's talk about it, and he wouldn't talk to me, and they just dropped the class. So, I don't know. I'm a dad of teenagers, like I get it. Yeah. It's probably a really negative attitude, but I've decided all teenagers, you know, like all children are liars and cheats at some point in their life. Maybe that's false. Maybe somebody out there never lied to their parents, but
So are adults.
yeah. Exactly. Anyway, I'm sorry. I interrupted somebody who had a real question.
Kristen had her hand up there.
On the Proctorio, will like other noises affect it? Because like when I was taking my test, my husband was working and he got like a lot of calls and had meetings, and you could like, even though like the door is shut, our walls are thin, I can still hear everything he does, and I'm sure my computer picked up the noises. Like, would that affect anything or no?
Probably not. So,
Okay.
So worst case scenario is it'll send me a thing and I'll contact you, and you'll be like, remember I said my husband was working? And I'll be like,
Okay.
oh yeah, like that would be it. Unless your husband is on the phone loudly in the next room reading out formulas on the phone or something, like
Yeah.
I wouldn't worry about it.
Okay, cool. Yeah, he's not doing that, so all right. All right, thanks.
Kristen, did you have a question or a thought?
Oh,
Or
no, I was just acknowledging that the anxiety that Proctor gives me is ridiculous.
yeah, and you're not alone. And I wish I could like say something more comforting than other than like, sometimes there's value in knowing you're one of like 100 people that's all feeling the same way, but it doesn't really change anything. Anyway, okay. Well, like I said, I'll try to have some feedback out to you guys the next today or tomorrow, and including some personalized feedback. Let me make sure I have a list of everybody who's here so I can get you that. If you see me looking over to the side, it's because your pictures are over there with your names.
Did you feel like there was Proctorio right now and we were wondering where you were looking?
Yeah, you guys are like judging me or something.
My camera is in the bottom left corner of my screen instead of like the top middle like y'all's is. And so I can't even, like, I have to offset my computer, this laptop, I have to like put it at an angle to even get it to approve me for Proctorio. And then I just move it back. And I think the whole time he's probably going to get a flag because my head's not in it all the way.
Yeah.
But, you know.
That's why I'm in my work office. I don't like to be at home because my camera's down lower and like it shows my double chins worse.
Oh yeah,
But
I get that.
here I've got a nice high camera and it's like shooting from above. And so if I like do it just right, I can still pretend I'm young and handsome. Like anyway, so yeah, I feel your camera issues. And again, we're just doing the best we can. You know, the other option, of course, is that we have to meet all together in a classroom. So it's still pretty amazing that we can do this. You know, we have people all over the world in this class, and so that's wonderful. But there's some cost, like the view of my double chins. I apologize in advance for that.
No.
Anyway, you know, one last, I guess maybe a closing thought. Is some people, when they do poorly on exams, they get pretty discouraged. Remember that that for some people, like exam anxiety is like a real thing. In other words, it's not always a sign that you don't understand the concepts. Sometimes it's a sign that you get nervous on exams. And the class is structured that even if you had like a 55% average on the exams, you can still pass the class. Now I'm guessing that most people don't want to just pass; they want to get a good grade. But you know, don't get discouraged if you do end up with a bad score on an exam or two. It'll be okay. And then the other thing is sometimes I'll tell people, you know, if you prayerfully seek the Lord's help as you prepare, He'll help you. I think unfortunately for some people, the Lord has commanded us to seek learning, and I know and can testify that He will help us to learn. But I don't know if He cares that much about our grades. What I mean by that um, is sometimes, you know, if I'm praying to get a good grade, it doesn't feel like I'm getting a lot of answers to that. But if I'm praying for the Lord to help me learn to do that thing which He's commanded me to do, I know He helps me with that. He's helped me with grades too when they've mattered. You know, that when I was trying to get into that program or something like that. But um, you know, I think I was filming a video for our youth today. They're doing like a virtual young men, young women camp for the summer since they can't go on regular camps, um, and so the youth theme is go and do. And I've just been thinking about that a lot. That sometimes I spend a lot of effort praying that the Lord will help me with this or help me with that, and I think maybe I'm trying to move the Lord my way when really what prayer is the process by which I bring my heart in line with His. And then once I recognize I'm in line, then I go and I do, right? So don't get discouraged. The Lord has asked you to seek learning, and you're doing that. You're fulfilling the thing He's asked you to do, and you can expect divine help. I've been doing this a long time, and I can testify that that's true. He will help you. Anyway, any other last minute thoughts or questions or anything else before we say a closing prayer? All right. Is there anyone besides Cheryl, since she said the opening prayer, who would be willing to offer a closing prayer for us?
Yes, I'll do it.
Great. Thanks, Becky.
Yeah. Our Heavenly Father, we're so grateful for this opportunity to be able to meet together, to be able to edify our minds and to gain understanding. And we pray this time that we will be able to retain the things that we're learning, and that we'll be able to understand concepts that might be difficult to understand. Heavenly Father, we're so thankful for our instructor, for Brother Fox, and for his kindness and willingness to help us. And we pray that I'll watch over each one of us this week and those that aren't in attendance. And we're so thankful for all that does for us. And we say these things in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. All right. Thank you. Have a great night.
Thank you.
Thanks, Brother Fox.
Thank you.
Yep, thank you.
Thank you.